Hello, my name is Leah, and I'm 40 years old. Most people look back on their 20s and remember youthful bliss. I look back and see a minefield. This isn't just my story, it's a story of two families who believed they could control fate, and the horrifying price we paid when fate fought back. The Harpers and the Canes. Our names were tied together long before I was born. My family and James's family were the cornerstone of this community. We shared money, secrets, and an unwavering belief in legacy. We were powerful because we were one. To cement this dynasty, they devised a plan, marriage. My older sister Sarah was the first. She married James's older brother David. They were the perfect formal couple, and their union established the peace. We, James and I, were the reinforcement, the second layer of security. James came. He was my destiny. We didn't choose each other. We were assigned to each other. From childhood, we were molded into the ideal pair. When I was 17, he slipped a diamond ring onto my finger. It wasn't a question of love. We were in love. It was a question of inevitable power. The engagement party was extravagant, a public declaration that nothing could ever break the Harper-Kane alliance. But what if the alliance itself was built on quicksand? What the cheering guests didn't know, what James and I certainly didn't know at the time, was the monstrous secret hidden beneath the champagne toasts. A secret so dark that it should have destroyed the families before the alliance even began. Years before, when we were just kids, there was a terrible incident, a tragedy that was swept under the rug and buried with my father. My father didn't die of natural causes. He died because of James. Yes, James, my handsome, devoted fiancé. He was barely 8 years old. It was a horrific, unforeseen accident, a moment of childish recklessness with devastating consequences. The Kane family, terrified of ruin, and my own mother, desperate to maintain her status and stability, agreed to a pact of silence. They silenced the truth about my father's death, and as a macabre pre-seal on that pact, they orchestrated my engagement to his accidental killer. They put the ring on my finger, hoping that love and time would bury the guilt forever. When I eventually learned that truth, it didn't just break my heart, it poisoned my very soul. But I wasn't the only one who had been lied to. The cracks in the foundation started appearing much sooner, long before the truth about my father surfaced. They started with the perfect couple, Sarah and David. The two families were so confident in their plan that they overlooked the simplest of human flaws, incompatibility. The engagement ring on my finger was meant to symbolize an unbroken dynasty, but beneath all the sparkle lay the horrific secret of my father's death. That hidden truth was the poison, but the divorce of my sister and James's brother was the first sharp blade that sliced our world apart. Sarah and David, my sister and James's older brother, they were the original perfect couple, but their marriage was purely strategic, not spiritual. Sarah was all light and rebellion. David was the cold, calculating heir of the Kane Empire. They were forced to embody a unity that simply didn't exist between them. The friction became unbearable after just a few years. It was about more than personality. It was about power. David, in his need for control, became obsessed with Sarah's spending. He saw her love for art and life as reckless extravagance, something the rigid Kanes could not tolerate. When he took their personal financial quarrel and presented it to the family boards, making it a public statement about the Harper family's supposed fiscal irresponsibility, that was the unforgivable betrayal. Sarah filed for divorce, and it was a catastrophic declaration of war. This was not a quiet, private separation. It was a vicious public court battle where the two families, who had shared every holiday, suddenly became mortal enemies. The Kanes deployed their expensive lawyers to paint Sarah as a frivolous opportunist. My mother, in response, unleashed years of pent-up resentment, painting David as a cold, manipulative robot obsessed with family wealth. The divorce proceedings were a weekly humiliation. Every private shame, every financial maneuver, every harsh word ever exchanged between Sarah and David was weaponized and thrown across the courtroom. James and I, the supposed saviors of the alliance, were drowning in the hatred. We were forced to defend our respective siblings, even when we knew they were both behaving horribly. Every conversation with James became a tightrope walk over a chasm of familial loyalty. I remember the pressure cooker of those months. One evening, after I had spent hours defending Sarah to my furious mother, I met James at a quiet coffee shop. He looked defeated. He kept tracing the edge of my engagement ring, and his eyes were full of fear. He didn't yell, he just whispered, "They're not just divorcing David and Sarah, Leah. They're divorcing the families. If they can tear apart the foundation that easily, what future can we possibly build on this hatred?" The divorce didn't just split two people, it fundamentally altered the relationship between the Harpers and the Canes. It replaced their strategic alliance with a deep, toxic animosity. It taught our parents that compromise was weakness and that winning, at any cost, was the only way to survive. The stage was set. The fire started with a divorce, but the entire house burned down because of a single, reckless act of revenge. This next incident wasn't an argument or a legal battle. It was a direct financial sabotage that resulted in a public, irredeemable loss. It was the moment my father delivered the final, devastating blow, ensuring my engagement to James would be humiliatingly canceled and cementing the hatred forever. Next time, I'll tell you about the night the alliance died. The hatred ignited by the divorce of Sarah and David was intense, but it was just the warm-up act. That legal battle was about separating two people. The conflict that followed was about total destruction, the destruction of our entire alliance. My father, deeply humiliated and financially wounded by the way the Canes treated Sarah during the divorce, became consumed by a desperate need for revenge. He wasn't thinking about business, he was thinking about spite. He decided to deliver a final, devastating blow to James's father. It involved a massive, multi-million-dollar real estate development. The Canes had poured almost all their liquid capital and reputation into this project. It was their crown jewel, set to launch and secure their dominance for the next decade. My father, using his intimate knowledge of the Canes' operations, executed a calculated, catastrophic act of sabotage. He didn't just back out of the deal, he orchestrated a series of targeted leaks and strategic maneuvers that essentially tanked the project's public offering. He revealed crucial, non-public information to the competition, knowing it would cause the market to panic. The result? The Canes' stock plummeted. Their lenders panicked. The entire deal collapsed spectacularly. It wasn't just a loss of money, it was a public shaming. James's father, a man whose entire identity was tied up in his financial prowess, was left reeling. He had been blindsided and humiliated by the man he once called his partner, the man who was supposed to become his daughter-in-law's father. That night, the night the news broke across every financial network, is seared into my memory. I was at home, watching the television reports with my mother. She looked triumphant, a frightening mixture of glee and righteous anger, but I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I knew, absolutely knew, what this meant for James and me. Within the hour, the phone rang. It wasn't James. It was his father. His voice, usually booming with authority, was ragged and laced with venom. He didn't speak to my mother about business. He spoke about me. He told my mother in no uncertain terms that the engagement was over, canceled, not postponed, not reconsidered, canceled. He said the Harpers were dead to the Canes, and that my father's action was a declaration of war that he would never forgive. He screamed that I would never be welcome in his family, and that the name Harper was a curse. My engagement ring, which I had cherished as a symbol of our future, instantly became a symbol of defeat and humiliation. I stood there, 17 years old, watching the entire perfectly planned future I had been promised dissolve into a cloud of financial smoke and fury. My love for James, which had somehow survived the sibling divorce, couldn't survive this. We were forbidden to speak, forbidden to see each other. The Harpers and the Canes erected an impenetrable wall of hatred, and James and I were left on opposite sides, heartbroken and utterly alone. The shock of the cancellation was immense, but it was just the beginning of my new, isolated life. For the next 5 years, James and I were enemies. Forced to share the same small town, we couldn't avoid each other, and every accidental encounter was laced with accusation and pain. Next time, I'll tell you how our paths continued to cross in the most agonizing ways, and how the hatred grew so deep that I truly began to believe the man I loved was my sworn enemy. The engagement ring was back in a velvet box, the wedding plans were shredded, and the Harper and Kane families were officially at war. Parting ways was devastating, but the worst part was that we couldn't actually part. We lived in the same city, moved in the same elite social circles, and our businesses, though now hostile, still operated in the same industry. James and I were locked into a permanent, agonizing state of proximity. For 5 years after the cancellation, we were forced to be enemies. I spent those years trying desperately to hate him. My mother, in her constant state of righteous fury over the broken engagement and the financial feud, never missed an opportunity to remind me that James was now a Kane, a member of the opposing army. Every time I saw James, I was supposed to see the enemy, and at first, I succeeded. We ran into each other constantly, at charity events, at the courthouse, even at the same exclusive gym. The air would immediately become thick and charged. We wouldn't just avoid eye contact, we would meet it and hold it, daring the other person to look away first. In those staring contests, there was no longer the soft intimacy of young love. There was pain, accusation, and a profound shared grief. But the family hatred was so strong, so pervasive, that it acted as an invisible shield, forcing us to keep our distance. I remember one night vividly. I was at a gallery opening trying to look detached and successful. James walked in with a woman, beautiful, poised, clearly someone his family approved of. The moment our eyes met across the room, it was a physical blow. He didn't acknowledge me, but his hand tightened almost visibly on the other woman's arm. It was a clear message. I have moved on. I belong elsewhere now. And I felt the sting of betrayal even though I was the one who was supposed to be hating him. In that moment, the years of separation, the family's lies, and the engineered hatred coalesced into a sharp, blinding fury. I wanted to see him hurt just as much as I was. The hostility became our new language. Whenever we had to exchange a polite word, say about a mutual business associate, it was laced with venom and sarcasm. I genuinely started to believe he saw me only as a symbol of his family's defeat, the daughter of the man who ruined his father. What I didn't understand then was that James was suffering too, probably more deeply than I was. He was navigating the same impossible loyalty demands, burdened by his family's expectation to despise the Harpers. He was also carrying a secret I still didn't fully know, the truth about my father's death. That immense guilt must have been crushing him. We were two wounded teenagers forced to play roles in our parents' destructive, ongoing war. We hated each other because it was the only way we could survive the impossible situation. After 5 years of this brutal, enforced separation, fate decided our paths needed to collide again, but this time professionally. Our families were forced to work on a huge, complex business deal, a project too big for either to handle alone. This wasn't a choice, it was a mandate. Next time, I'll tell you about the terrifying reality of having to sit across the table from my sworn enemy every day, and how those tense, professional meetings slowly, painfully, began to chip away at the armor of hatred we had built around our hearts. For 5 years, James and I had perfected the art of frozen hatred. We were masters of the hostile glance, the sarcastic remark, the careful distance. We truly believed we were done with each other, safe behind the walls our families had built. But fate, as I've learned, has a cruel sense of humor. Our professional worlds, though separated by fierce rivalry, were too intertwined to remain apart forever. A massive new infrastructure project landed in the city, a project so complex and demanding that neither the Harpers nor the Kanes could realistically win the bid alone. It was an economic mandate, collaborate or fail. The patriarchs hated the idea. James's father practically choked on the proposal, and my mother fought it with every ounce of her pride. But the potential profit was too vast, and the risk of the competition swooping in was too great. Grudgingly, furiously, they agreed to a temporary, highly volatile partnership. And who did the family choose to spearhead the collaboration? Me, representing the Harpers, and James representing the Canes. It was a deliberate, vicious strategy. Our parents didn't choose us because we were the most qualified. They chose us because they wanted to ensure the process was fraught with maximum tension. They wanted two generals who already despised each other, hoping the bitterness would keep the other side in check. I remember walking into the first joint strategy meeting. The air conditioning unit might as well have been off because the room temperature was Arctic. James was already there, impeccably dressed, leaning back in his chair. He looked older, sharper, and dangerously confident. 5 years of running the cane business had hardened his features. He looked up as I entered. There was no flicker of the boy I loved, only the cold, impenetrable mask of the enemy. The first few weeks were a disaster. Every meeting was a battlefield. We fought over budgets, timelines, and even the font used on the presentation slides. Every professional disagreement was secretly laced with personal resentment. When James rejected my proposal, I didn't hear a sound business critique. I heard the arrogance of a Cain. When I challenged his numbers, he didn't hear valid concerns. He heard the spite of a Harper seeking revenge. We sat across the conference table from each other 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. We were forced to share documents, argue strategies, and find solutions, all while simultaneously holding onto the deep-seated family requirement to despise the other. It was agonizing. We spoke hundreds of words daily, none of them personal, all of them strained. But the odd thing about forced proximity is that sometimes hatred requires more energy than curiosity. Slowly, imperceptibly, the armor began to chip. I started to notice how fiercely intelligent he was, how ethically he managed the money despite his family's reputation, and how fiercely protective he was of the younger staff. And I started to sense that behind his cold exterior, he was studying me too. The professional collaboration was our prison, but it also became our unexpected escape route. Because the more we fought about business, the more we revealed the people we actually were, not the family names we carried. Next time, I'll tell you about the night the business masks finally cracked, and how a moment of shared, unexpected crisis forced us to confront the fact that the intense hatred we held for each other might just be covering up something far more dangerous, the resurgence of our original, undeniable love. The joint project was our daily torment. Sitting across from James, fighting over amortization schedules and zoning permits, felt like a bizarre psychological experiment. We were forced to be partners, yet programmed to be opponents. But the continuous friction, ironically, was what saved us. Hatred requires distance. Familiarity breeds something else entirely. The breaking point wasn't a romantic moment. It was a crisis. We were nearing a critical deadline, a massive presentation to secure the final financing, when a crucial piece of our data vanished. It was a sophisticated security breach designed to look like a simple system failure. Panic ripped through the joint team. If we couldn't recover that data within 12 hours, the entire deal, the last hope of our family's major financial recovery, would collapse. Everyone panicked, but James, he was terrifyingly calm. I watched him take control. He didn't yell or assign blame. He started issuing clear, rapid-fire instructions to the tech team. He stayed up all night, eyes red, fueled by black coffee and sheer determination. I realized, watching him, that the James I had loved, the leader, the protector, was still there, just buried beneath the Cain exterior. And in that moment of crisis, my own defense mechanisms failed. I stopped seeing the enemy and started seeing my teammate. Around 3 a.m., when the frustration was thick enough to cut with a knife, James slammed his hand down on the table. Defeated, the system was locked. He ran his hand over his face, looking older and more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. I walked over without thinking and placed my hand on his shoulder. He flinched, then slowly looked up at me. It was the first time we had touched, truly touched. in 5 long years. The shock of the contact, the jolt of that familiar electricity, was overwhelming. For the first time since the engagement ended, his eyes weren't cold. They were filled with exhaustion, and then a profound, aching vulnerability. I can't lose this, Leah, not after everything. I knew he wasn't just talking about the project. He was talking about his family's reputation, his pride, and the deep, shared failure of our past. I felt a surge of empathy so strong it knocked the breath out of me. The wall of hatred, built so painstakingly over 5 years, crumbled in a single second of shared despair. I didn't answer the business concern. I answered the ache. It was a small, quiet moment of unity against the world. We weren't fighting each other. We were fighting the disaster. And in that unity, the old feelings, the ones we had suppressed, denied, and poisoned with family spite, rushed back with terrifying force. We worked side by side for the rest of the night, not as Harbers and Kane, but as James and Leah. We recovered the data just minutes before the presentation. We won the bid. But the true victory was that the hostility between us was gone, replaced by an awareness that we were still profoundly, dangerously attracted to one another. The crisis brought us together, but the victory forced us back into close professional proximity. Now that the hatred was gone, we were left with something far more complicated, lingering feelings, intense tension, and the memory of the life we almost had. Next time, I'll tell you about the awkward, beautiful, and terrifying start of our secret relationship and how we risked everything, including the fragile business alliance, to steal moments together. After that disastrous all-night session where we recovered the data, the old rules changed. The invisible wall of hatred that separated James and me didn't just crack, it dissolved. In its place was a fierce, undeniable tension. We were back to seeing the person, not the enemy name. The successful joint bid meant we had to continue working side by side for the foreseeable future. The Harpers and the Kanes were now tethered together for this massive project. But beneath the facade of professional collaboration, something reckless and terrifying began to bloom. We started stealing moments. It began subtly, a late-night text about a budget query that quickly devolved into a conversation about something deeply personal. A quick, hurried lunch in a restaurant far outside our usual territory where we could talk without the fear of being seen by a rival family member. Those stolen moments were intoxicating. They were a rebellion against the rigid rules our families had imposed on us. In those fleeting hours, we weren't Leah Harper and James Kane. We were just two people desperately trying to reclaim the 5 years that had been stolen. We talked about everything, the crippling pressure from our parents, the suffocating expectations, and the lingering pain of the canceled engagement. I asked him, finally, about the woman he had been seen with, the beautiful, poised woman his family approved of. He admitted with a tired resignation that she was just another piece of the business strategy, someone he felt obligated to see. James recalled, "I can't live the life they want from me, Leah, not after knowing what real life feels like with you." Hearing those words, after years of believing he hated me, was like finding air after being held underwater. Our secret dates became essential. I started lying to my mother, elaborate, careful lies about late meetings and professional dinners. James did the same. We were like teenagers sneaking out, but the stakes were infinitely higher. If our families discovered us, it wouldn't just mean a personal argument. It would jeopardize the entire multi-million-dollar business alliance. The economic repercussions alone would be catastrophic. The fear only intensified the thrill. One evening, we were finishing a late-night work session at his office. The building was empty. The conversation faded, and we were suddenly just two people standing too close after years of forced separation. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and gently brushed the hair away from my face. That single touch was more potent than any kiss. It was an acknowledgment of everything we had been and everything we were risking. He didn't speak. He just leaned in, and after 5 long years of separation and manufactured hatred, he kissed me. It was fierce, desperate, and utterly heartbreaking. It was a kiss that confessed years of suppressed pain, confusion, and undeniable love. But as soon as the kiss ended, the crushing reality returned. We were not just two lovers, we were the children of enemies. We had started a love affair under the deadliest possible circumstances. We were living a beautiful, dangerous lie, but lies always catch up. Next time, I'll tell you about the terrifying moment the truth about our renewed relationship began to surface, and how James and I realized that we could not keep this secret hidden much longer, especially when his mother began to suspect everything. Our secret affair was the most exhilarating and terrifying thing I had ever done. Every stolen moment with James felt like a victory against the families who had tried to crush us. We were drunk on rebellion and the rediscovery of our old, undeniable love. But secrecy requires perfection, and perfection is impossible when dealing with two families as sharp and paranoid as the Harpers and the Canes. The first shadow of suspicion fell, predictably, from the coldest, most watchful member of the Cane family, James's mother. She was a brilliant woman, controlled, perceptive, and utterly devoted to the Cane name. And she had never forgiven me or my family for the divorce of David and Sarah or for my father's financial sabotage. She started noticing the anomalies. It began with the unusual length of our late-night work sessions. While she trusted James's dedication to the business, she didn't trust me. She started dropping by James's office unannounced, ostensibly to check on the project. One evening I had stayed late with James. We were finishing up, the tension between us palpable, when his mother walked into the room. She was wearing her most severe expression, and her gaze was like ice. She didn't accuse us directly. Instead, she performed a chilling assessment. She looked at the two empty coffee mugs, the slightly disheveled stack of papers, and then, most tellingly, she looked at James's face. James is an excellent businessman, but a terrible liar. He visibly tensed under her scrutiny, and his attempt at a casual greeting sounded strained and artificial. She ignored me completely and spoke only to him. James's mother, James. The project is important, but personal attachments can complicate business judgment, especially when dealing with certain unreliable elements. The message was clear. I was the unreliable element. She was warning him away from me, confirming that the hatred born from the divorce and the sabotage was still fiercely alive. After she left, James was furious at his mother's intrusion, but I was terrified. She hadn't seen a kiss or a hug, but she had sensed the undeniable connection. That level of suspicion was enough to ruin us. We realized we had become careless. The thrill of rebellion had overridden our caution. We immediately had to tighten our security. No more late nights in the office. No more easy, public lunches. Our secret trysts became even more hidden in dimly lit bars 2 towns over, or quick, nervous visits to a hotel where neither of us had ever been. The fear of discovery became an ever-present third party in our relationship, gnawing at the edges of our happiness. We knew that if James's mother exposed us, the consequences wouldn't just be emotional, they would be economic warfare. The fragile joint project would collapse, bankrupting both families and placing the blame squarely on James and me. James's mother was closing in, but her suspicion didn't break us. It cemented our commitment. We had faced the Canes' initial hatred and my family's fury over the years, but we still hadn't confronted the single, darkest secret that underpinned our entire history, James's role in my father's death. Next time, I'll tell you about the terrifying conversation where James finally, years later, found the courage to confess the truth to me. That single confession was more powerful than any lie, and it forced me to confront the hatred I was supposed to feel. James's mother was a cold, constant threat to our secret relationship, but she was only exposing the present danger. We were still ignoring the past, the dark, silent secret that underpinned every single event in our lives, James's childhood role in my father's death. I knew he was involved. The families had hinted at an incident and unforeseen consequences. But I had never heard the full, brutal truth from James himself. How could I truly love the man who caused my father's death without fully understanding the wound? One rainy evening, we were hiding in a secluded rental apartment we used for our secretive meetings. The close call with his mother had shaken James deeply. He seemed burdened, heavier than usual. I looked at him and realized that if we were going to build anything real, the foundation couldn't be a lie. James, we have to talk about my father. I need to know everything, not the version my mother gave me, not the version your father buried. The truth, your truth. He visibly flinched. The air in the room became instantly thick with dread. He walked over to the window, staring out at the rain, and for a long time he just stood there, struggling to find the words. When he finally turned around, his eyes were red. He was no longer the sharp businessman. He was the scared 8-year-old boy reliving a nightmare. It was years ago. We were playing down by the old construction site, the one your father owned. It was restricted, but we snuck in. We were daredevil kids. He paused, gathering his strength. James recalled dialogue. We found a piece of heavy equipment, a crane or a small digger. I climbed into the cab. I didn't know how to drive it. I just wanted to feel big, feel powerful. He confessed that he accidentally hit a lever. He hadn't been watching the area near the machine. My father, who was doing a late-night inspection of the site, had been standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. I heard a sound, a loud crack. And then, the silence. I ran, Leah. I was just a terrified kid, and I ran home and screamed until my father rushed me to the hospital, claiming I'd been hurt somewhere else. My father went back and found your dad. He finished the story, and the apartment was silent except for the drumming rain. It was horrifying. It was raw. But in that moment, seeing his unvarnished pain, hearing the confession he had carried like a lead weight for 2 decades, something shifted in me. It wasn't the malicious murder I had sometimes, in my darkest moments, imagined. It was a tragic, terrible childhood accident covered up by ruthless adults. I stared at him, my heart breaking, not just for my father, but for the terrified boy James had been. Why? Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you agree to the engagement? I couldn't lose you, Leah. They made me promise. They said it was the only way to protect both families, the only way to keep us close. And I was selfish. I loved you too much to give you up, even with that truth hanging over us. His confession was the ultimate test. The hatred I was supposed to feel was warring with the profound love I did feel. He was responsible, yes, but he was also a victim of the same secrecy and manipulation. The truth about my father's death was finally out, but its revelation did not push us apart. It drew us closer, united by the terrible secret our families had forced us to carry. We knew then that if we truly wanted a life together, we had to stop hiding. Next time, I'll tell you about our desperate, dangerous plan to finally confess our renewed love to our families and how we decided to force their hands by bringing the two warring sides together for a single, terrifying meeting. James's confession about my father's death was the moment of reckoning. It was agonizing, terrifying, and ultimately clarifying. The hatred I was supposed to feel was utterly dwarfed by the love and pity I felt for the terrified boy he had been. The families had used the tragedy as a foundation for a lie, and by sharing the truth, James and I finally freed ourselves from that poison. We realized 2 things. We couldn't live without each other, and we couldn't continue living in secret. The threat of James's mother, the constant lies, the fear of discovery, it was exhausting. Our love deserved air. So we made a desperate, reckless decision, we would tell them. We would force the Harpers and the Canes to face the undeniable truth that their enemies were in love and intended to marry. The planning was meticulous. We knew that approaching them separately would lead to immediate isolation and manipulation. We had to hit them simultaneously, together, and on neutral ground. We chose a small, elegant restaurant known for its privacy and discretion, far enough away that no one would be recognized. We sent out cryptic invitations, stating it was a mandatory meeting concerning the future security of the joint business venture, a clear order they couldn't ignore. My mother arrived first, cold and suspicious, immediately asking where the joint project manager was. Then came James's parents. The moment they saw my mother, the air congealed. The two couples sat at the large round table, separated by years of animosity, exchanging hostile pleasantries that tasted like acid. Then James and I walked in hand in hand. The effect was instantaneous and stunning. Four pairs of eyes that usually held nothing but calculation and pride, flickered with disbelief, then rage. James's mother was the first to speak, her voice low and dangerously controlled. James's mother recalled dialogue. "What is the meaning of this, James? Release her hand. This is unprofessional and insulting." James held my hand tighter. He didn't waver. He looked directly at his father, the man who had ordered him to hate me, and delivered our declaration. James recalled dialogue. "We are here because there is no business crisis. There is only a family announcement. Leah and I are back together. We love each other, and we are going to get married." Silence. A profound, ringing silence that lasted for what felt like an hour. Then the explosion. My mother's chair scraped back as she stood up, her face white with fury. She didn't shout. She delivered a cold, precise threat. James's father, meanwhile, turned crimson and started hammering his fist on the table. My mother recalled dialogue. "You will not marry him, Leah. Not the son of the man who ruined your father's business, and certainly not the son of the man who killed him." In that moment, she inadvertently confirmed the terrible secret to the other parent, that she knew I was aware of the truth. But James and I stood firm, facing the onslaught together. We were no longer terrified teenagers. We were two people fighting for their right to exist. Our announcement didn't secure our future. It initiated the next most vicious phase of the war. Our parents were not going to accept this easily. They resorted to every manipulation, threat, and financial pressure imaginable to break us apart. Next time, I'll tell you about the desperate measures they took to separate us and how their attempts actually forced us to make an even bolder move to protect our love. Our declaration of love in that restaurant was met not with acceptance, but with an absolute unified determination to crush us. Our parents saw our reunion as the ultimate act of treason, a betrayal that could not stand. They knew that emotional threats might fail, but financial leverage, the thing that defined their entire existence, would not. They decided to hit us where it hurt the most, our wallets, our careers, and the very stability of the lives they had built for us. The attacks were swift and merciless. First, the quote-he financial isolations. My mother immediately froze all my personal accounts and cut off my access to the family's assets. She effectively made me financially dependent on my current salary, which was tied up in the unstable joint project. The message was clear. Choose James, and you choose poverty. The Canes were even more brutal with James. His father, in a spectacular act of corporate cruelty, threatened to liquidate certain assets that James had personally managed and invested in over the years, deals that represented a decade of his hard work. If James didn't break off the engagement, his father vowed to dismantle his reputation and his financial future, stripping him of the career he had dedicated his life to. But the most devastating pressure came through the H joint business project. The parents started subtly sabotaging the venture from the inside. They would delay signing crucial documents, withhold key information, and plant seeds of doubt with our investors. Their goal was simple: force the entire project to fail, bankrupting both families and ensuring that James and I, as the project leaders, would be held responsible for the catastrophic loss. They wanted to prove that our love was a destructive, selfish force. The pressure mounted daily. James and I were fighting not just for our relationship, but for our professional lives and the financial solvency of our entire extended families. We started seeing the deep cracks in the Keynes' and Harper's respective financial empires, empires that relied on the continuous facade of power. I remember one night James came to me utterly defeated. His father had just delivered an ultimatum. My father told me, "If you marry her, you will lose everything. The money, the name, your entire future. You will be held solely accountable for the downfall of the Kane Corporation." He was terrified. We were two people who had fought so hard to reclaim our lives, only to find our parents were willing to tear down everything, including themselves, just to prevent us from being together. Their attempts to starve us out financially were working. We were stressed, paranoid, and constantly fighting fires. The financial threats were designed to break our resolve, but they achieved the opposite. They showed us just how shallow and transactional our parents' love was. We realized that to truly win, we had to go beyond mere defiance. We needed leverage. Next time, I'll tell you about the desperate, dangerous move we made. We started gathering evidence on our parents' financial corruption, hoping to find the one secret that could truly silence them and secure our freedom. Our parents' strategy was crystal clear: use the threat of ruin to force us apart. They hoped that the financial pressure and the destruction of the joint project would make us see our love as a liability. But their ruthlessness backfired. It didn't make us hate each other. It made us realize that the only way to survive and the only way to protect our future was to fight fire with fire. We needed leverage, something powerful enough to force them to back down. We decided the only thing that could truly silence the Harpers and the Canes was the threat of public exposures of their own secrets. We knew both families, in their decades of ruthless business dealings, must have cut corners. We knew they had hidden transactions, questionable mergers, and the inevitable financial skeletons locked deep in their closets. We just had to find them. This wasn't just a search for documents, it was a deeply dangerous dive into the heart of their corruption. We used our access to the joint project's internal files as a cover. Late at night, using private encrypted channels, James and I began the methodical process of cross-referencing old ledger entries, tracing wire transfers, and analyzing archived emails. We were two detectives, working against our own flesh and blood. The danger was immense. If our parents caught us spying, not only would they destroy us financially, but they could easily use their influence to destroy our reputations, or worse. The most difficult part was accessing the oldest files, the archives that contained the secrets of the initial alliance, the period right after my father's death. James had access to the Kane archives, and I had mine. We traded encrypted files, each one revealing a new layer of our parents' calculated greed. What we found was staggering. We uncovered evidence of massive tax evasion, insider trading schemes, and highly unethical land acquisitions that victimized smaller businesses. They weren't just ruthless, they were operating on the edge of legality, relying on their power to keep regulators at bay. But the real jackpot came when James located a hidden digital file in his father's personal archive. It wasn't about money, it was about the cover-up of my father's death. It was a contingency plan, a detailed, written agreement between my mother and James's father outlining exactly how they would leverage the engagement and the promise of a merger to secure my mother's silence about the incident and ensure the Canes faced no legal repercussions. It was proof that the engagement wasn't just a nice idea, it was a criminal agreement to obstruct justice. We had done it. We had the smoking gun proof of financial corruption and proof that our entire engagement was a cold, calculated transaction built on a lie and the obstruction of justice. But leverage is only useful when you're ready to use it. Next time, I'll tell you about the terrifying confrontation where James and I laid out our evidence to our parents and the desperate, shocking lengths James's father went to when he realized we held the power to destroy him. We had the evidence, not just proof of widespread financial corruption in both families, but the ultimate damning document, the signed agreement between my mother and James's father confirming that my engagement was a deliberate pact to silence the truth and obstruct justice regarding my father's death. That document was the key to our freedom. We knew we couldn't keep it secret forever. We had to use it immediately before they sensed our rebellion and moved against us. We set up another meeting, this time not in a restaurant, but in James's private office, neutral territory, but on Kane ground. The air was charged with dread because our parents, having tasted the depths of their children's defiance, knew this meeting was different. We sat them down, my mother, James's father, and James's mother. We didn't allow any initial conversation. James took the lead, his voice steady, carrying the authority of someone who held all the cards. He didn't yell, he just placed two sealed envelopes on the table. This meeting is about the future of the Harper and Kane families. You attempted to financially ruin us to prevent our marriage. We now present our counter offer. He slid the envelopes forward. One held the meticulously compiled evidence of their collective tax evasion and insider trading schemes. The other held the copy of the original silence pact regarding my father. The first envelope, should it be released, guarantees a full federal investigation that will expose all of you and dismantle your corporation. The second envelope proves that our engagement was founded on a conspiracy to obstruct justice, a criminal offense. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. My mother went pale, her eyes fixed on the envelope detailing the conspiracy. James's father, the fierce patriarch, didn't move for a long moment, staring at the envelopes as if they were snakes. You would betray your own blood? You would send your family to prison. You forced our hand. You chose money and control over our happiness. Our ultimatum is simple. We will marry. You will legally secure the joint business project in our names, ensuring our immediate financial independence. And you will stop, permanently, all attempts to interfere in our lives. He paused, letting the weight of the demand settle. If you agree, the envelopes remain sealed, and we protect your secrets. If you refuse, we release the evidence by midnight. The silence returned, heavier this time, filled with the sheer magnitude of the betrayal and the threat. They were trapped. They could choose to sacrifice their power, or they could choose to destroy their legacy entirely. James's father, the man who had ordered his son to despise me, finally collapsed, not physically, but spiritually. He looked at James, not with anger, but with a horrifying mix of pride and defeat. James's father hated being cornered, and his final desperate move proved just how much he valued control over everything else. He didn't accept the ultimatum immediately. Instead, he tried to turn the tables in a desperate bid to win James back. Next time, I'll tell you about the shocking counteroffer he made, a final, emotional manipulation that forced James to make the ultimate choice between his family name and me. My heart was pounding after we delivered the ultimatum. We had placed their entire corrupt world on a knife edge. The silence was agonizing, but it was clear they were beaten. They couldn't risk the criminal charges and the utter collapse of their legacy. But James's father, a man who valued the Kane name above all else, couldn't accept defeat easily. He wouldn't concede power without one last desperate attempt at manipulation. He ignored the envelopes on the table and looked only at James, his expression shifting from rage to chilling sincerity. James, your mother and I understand your satisfactions for Leah. We see your determination. We will agree to the terms. A flicker of hope ignited in me, but his next words extinguished it instantly. But I offer a counter deal, a final chance to protect your name. You can keep Leah. You can marry her, secure the project, and gain your freedom, but in exchange, you must officially divest and disavow the Kane family name. You must walk away from the legacy, publicly stating that you reject everything we stand for. You will cease to be a Kane, and you will never again have access to the family network or title. It was a brilliant, cruel manipulation, he was saying. You can have your freedom and your love, but you lose your identity, your history, and the power that comes with the name you've carried your whole life. He knew how fiercely James protected the Kane legacy, even as he fought against its corruption. The room held its breath. My mother, seeing a chance to inflict ultimate spite on the Kanes, actually smirked. James's mother gasped, horrified that her husband would threaten to disown their son. James looked at the envelopes, the proof that the Kane legacy was built on lies and crime. Then he looked at the woman he had loved, lost, and fought to reclaim. Finally, he looked at his father, the man who had forced him into silence about my father's death and tried to destroy his future. James's decision was instantaneous. Done. I agree to your terms. He leaned forward, picked up the legal pad, and scribbled furiously. Draft the divestment paperwork immediately. I choose my future. I choose Leah. The Cain name is a prison built on lies, and I walk free. His father looked utterly defeated, realizing his manipulation had backfired completely. He had intended to punish James with the loss of the name, but James turned it into an act of profound liberation. The envelopes remained sealed. The terms were set: marriage, financial independence, and total family severance. We won, but the victory felt heavy, bought with the price of James's entire past. The battle against our parents was finally over, secured by James's massive sacrifice. But the next battle was the hardest, reuniting the two families who now had even more reason to hate each other. Next time, I'll tell you about our wedding and how that one ceremony, held under the most hostile circumstances, unexpectedly started the long, difficult process of healing the Harper-Kane feud. James's definitive choice to sacrifice the Kane name and legacy for me sealed our victory. Our parents were forced to concede. They signed the legal papers transferring the joint project's ownership to us and securing our financial freedom. The envelopes remained sealed. We were finally free to marry, but the price was James's identity and the deepening of the family's hatred. Our wedding was not a celebration. It was an act of extreme defiance. We didn't have a grand ceremony. We chose a simple, non-denominational chapel with only essential witnesses. The guest list was tragically short: a few close friends, Sarah, my sister, and David James's brother, who, after their own brutal divorce, actually offered us hesitant support. Our parents were there, of course, not out of joy, but out of obligation and spite. They were a menacing row of black suits and stone faces. My mother looked heartbroken and furious. James's parents looked like they were attending a funeral. They had lost their son, their name, and their control. The air in the chapel was thick with hostility. When James looked at me, though, nothing else mattered. He stood there, no longer defined by the Kane legacy, but by his own courage. When he placed the new wedding band on my finger, a band we chose ourselves, not one mandated by family history, it was the moment we truly began our life together. But the real drama didn't end with the vows. It began at the reception. The families, forced into the same room, couldn't contain their bitterness. There were no toasts, only tense, whispered accusations. My mother, in a devastating moment of private cruelty, cornered me. "You've ruined us, Leah. You chose the killer's son over the family who protected you. You'll live with this guilt for the rest of your life." I finally looked her in the eye, calm and steady. "You protected your status, Mother. You forced me into an engagement with the truth hidden. James and I built a love despite your lies. The guilt, Mother, is all yours." That was the last true fight. She realized that she had lost not just control over my life, but her emotional leverage over me. Later that evening, something unexpected happened. Sarah, my sister, who had been stiff and quiet, walked over to James. "David and we destroyed what our families built out of anger. You two, you fought through the anger and the lies and built something real. I admire that, James. I truly do." It was a small olive branch, offered not by a family member, but by a fellow survivor. This tiny moment of grace, standing there between the two warring factions, made me realize that our fight had been for more than just us. It was a fight for the right to choose love over legacy. The wedding secured our freedom, but the true goal, healing the families, was still miles away. We had exposed the corruption and forced the peace, but could we ever force true reconciliation? The wedding was a victory, but it left us standing on a pile of emotional rubble. James had sacrificed his name, and we had forced our parents into a resentful silence. We had won the right to be together, but we hadn't won peace. The greatest challenge remained: could our love actually heal the deep, toxic hatred between the Harpers and the Kanes? The years immediately following the wedding were quiet, but tense. James and I threw ourselves into the joint project, which was now fully ours. We ran it ethically, transparently, and with fierce dedication. We didn't just succeed, we thrived. We took the blueprint our parents had ruined and rebuilt it into a legitimate, powerful, and respected entity. Our success was undeniable, and ironically, it was the first thing that began to chip away at our parents' anger. They might hate us, but they respected success, especially when they saw that the failure they had engineered turned into a profitable triumph run by their own children. But the true breakthrough, as always, came not through business, but through a human moment. A few years into our marriage, we had a daughter. We named her Hope. Holding our daughter for the first time was a profound moment, but introducing her to the grandparents was the ultimate test. My mother came first. She arrived at the hospital stern and reserved. But the moment she looked at Hope, tiny, innocent, carrying the blood of both the Harper and the Kane families, her armor finally shattered. She burst into tears. "She looks like you, Leah. She looks like all of us. How could I have wasted so much time being angry?" she apologized. Not for the business, but for trying to crush my heart. That apology, years in the making, felt like the end of my war. James's parents, the Kanes, were slower to visit, burdened by the shame of having disowned their son. When they arrived, they were hesitant. James's father, the once unyielding patriarch, was reduced to a nervous older man. He didn't speak to James immediately. He only looked at Hope, then back at James. "She is a Kane. She is a Harper. She is everything. I am sorry, James, for the secret, for the silence, for making you choose." James simply nodded, his eyes shining with tears. He allowed his father to hold Hope. In that gentle, beautiful exchange, the decades of animosity, the guilt over my father's death, and the pain of the forced separation finally began to recede. Our daughter, Hope, became the literal embodiment of the reconciliation. She was the one common ground, the undeniable proof that the love between James and me was stronger than their hatred, their secrets, and their greed. Today, 20 years after that terrible incident that broke our world, James and I are still together. We run a thriving business, and we raise a family that is fiercely united. The Harpers and the Kanes are not exactly back to where they started. There are scars, yes, but the war is over. We share holidays, we celebrate milestones, and most importantly, we share hope. Our story proves that family loyalty can be toxic and secrets can be deadly. But it also proves that if a love is real, if it is fought for honestly, it can not only save two people, but it can heal two families. We chose love over legacy, and in doing so, we created a better legacy. Thank you for listening to my story. If you want to keep watching compelling stories of love, conflict, and revenge that defy the odds, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel.